Luca's quiet, solitary life as a park ranger seemed perfect until he was forced to return to night school to earn a college degree. From the moment he steps into the lecture hall, he's captivated by the magnetic Professor Grayson Hawthorne. During spring break, a chance encounter at a local gay leather bar between him and his teacher changed everything. Now, Luca is consumed by a desire he can no longer ignore. How can Luca be made to focus on business-related lectures in school when all he can think about is naughty nights with his professor in the bedroom? It's a new year, and that means a brand new Steamy Story just for you. I'm Nate, your host for Steamy Stories, written by JC Calciano. Today, we've created a special fable for our friends at Filmmakers Gallery in Palm Springs, who asked for a tale about a leather daddy. And of course, we couldn't resist their request. So, for all of you who love a burly bro in tight black leather, this one's for you. Slip on your riding boots, grab your chaps, and join us as we take you to a downtown leather bar in this month's Steamy Stories episode, Professor Daddy. Luca Moreno had loved the wilderness. At 25, he had recently become a park ranger for the National Forest. His days were spent patrolling the vast trails of the woods, his broad shoulders burdened with a pack, his hands steady and skilled as he rescued injured wildlife and helped lost hikers. His sun-kissed skin spoke of countless hours beneath open skies, and his dark, wind-swept hair framed a handsome, boyish face. Luca's warm, brown eyes shone with kindness and ambition. A lover of animals and the outdoors through and through, Luca thrived in solitude, his heart beating with the rhythm of the woods, even though he felt fulfilled in the forest. A gnawing loneliness had begun to creep into his quiet evenings. He loved his time alone on his hikes. However, another man's touch became increasingly present in his daily thoughts. Determined to build a sanctuary for the creatures he'd devoted his life to, Luca enrolled in a business course at a local college. He knew he needed to learn how to run a business if he were to start a hospital to care for the hurt and injured creatures of the woodlands. The idea of night classes seemed simple enough, even though going back to school was the last thing he wanted to do. He knew that he needed to return to college and earn a degree to succeed in his mission. Reluctantly, he signed up for night school at a local university. It's just 2 semesters, he told himself. It would be over before he knew it. I'll work during the day and go to school at night. True, it would leave me little time for myself or any chance to date, but Luca had long been accustomed to solitude. Another year without intimacy would be the price he'd have to pay to reach his goals. He signed up for the late class, a 4-month semester from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., 5 nights a week. The plan was straightforward: work until 4, grab a quick meal, head to class, learn what he needed, and leave. It was a simple, straightforward plan, he believed. However, he hadn't anticipated meeting Grayson Hawthorne when he showed up for his first day of class. Grayson wasn't just his professor. He was a force of nature, a magnetic presence that seemed to pull the room into focus when he stepped inside the lecture space to teach. Luca was drawn to him instantly. Professor Grayson had broad shoulders and was powerfully built. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew precisely what power his presence commanded. His tailored button-down shirts strained slightly as they fought to contain his muscular frame. His thick, dark hair was immaculately styled, slicked back in a way that spoke of discipline and precision, while his neatly trimmed beard framed a face that could have been carved from marble. A strong, masculine face supported a striking ruggedness to his perfectly symmetrical features. But it was his eyes, piercing, sapphire blue, like the sharp chill of a winter sky, that captivated Luca the most. Those eyes seemed to see through everything, stripping away all pretense and leaving only raw, unspoken truths behind. Grayson moved with the confidence of a man who knew his worth. Each deliberate gesture carried authority, whether he was adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses or leaning back against the desk as he taught, his muscular forearms on display where his sleeves rolled up. His voice was another weapon, deep, rich, and steady, like a low rumble of a distant storm. It resonated in a way that made every student sit a little straighter, though it did much more for Luca. By the second week, Luca realized he had a problem. During lectures, he found himself distracted, his attention drifting to the subtle details of his teacher, how his slacks fit perfectly, accentuating his form, and how the veins in his muscular arms flexed as he gestured. It became clear that every movement his professor made stirred something undeniable within him, leaving Luca captivated and overwhelmed by desire. The fantasies grew more intense daily. In Luca's mind, Grayson wasn't just a professor. He was a man who knew how to take control. A man who could pin Luca against a desk and unravel him piece by piece. The thoughts left him flushed and distracted, his lecture notes an incoherent mess of half-finished sentences and scribbled numbers. I can't take it anymore. My professor is so hot. It's driving me out of my mind, Luca confessed to his best friend Alex one evening as they ate a burger after class at a diner. Alex offered assistance to his frustrated friend by smirking and suggesting he ask Professor Daddy out on a date. Luca groaned. Don't call him that. Alex leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying his friend's misery, and laughed. Why not? It's true, he added. Look, you've got two options here. Either you keep drooling over him in class, or do something about it and ask him out. Are you nuts? Luca quipped. Professors don't date their students. Plus, who says he's even gay? Luca muttered, his gaze fixed on his beer. Alex shrugged, his grin widening. Fine, but you're clearly wound up and need a release. I'll tell you what. Let's go to the leather bar tonight. Blow off some steam. Trust me, the guys will make you forget about Professor Daddy. Luca frowned, his brow furrowing. A leather bar? Leather's not my scene, you know that. I've never been to one, and I don't know if I ever want to. That's precisely why you have to go. Get out of your comfort zone for once, okay? Alex leaned in. Besides, it's not just about the leather, it's about the men. Hot, confident, and absolutely your type. Reluctantly, Luca agreed. The bar was worlds away from his usual haunts, but Alex was right about one thing. He needed to get out of his head and try something new. After they finished their burgers, they headed out to Rawhide, the nearby leather bar. Upon entering, Luca was immediately struck by the heady mix of leather, musk, and the low thrum of bass-heavy music. The space was dark and intimate. The air was electric with unspoken possibilities. Men of every shape and size milled about, their laughter and low voices blending into the atmosphere. It was a far cry from the casual sports bar he frequented, but something about the energy here sent a shiver down his spine. He wasn't sure what he'd expected, but it wasn't this. A dark, intimate world where confidence radiated off the men like heat waves. Luca ordered 2 beers for them as he stood close to Alex, letting his gaze wander. And then he saw him. In the shadows, a hulking, gorgeous man leaned casually against the bar, his broad back turned to Luca. His arms, thick with muscle, were wrapped in tight leather straps that highlighted every sinew. A snug pair of dark jeans clung to powerful thighs, and a black leather vest hugged his torso, making every line of his body impossible to ignore. The dim light casting an alluring glow across his figure, highlighting the tautness of his shoulders and the curve of his spine. Luca's breath hitched as his gaze traced the man's silhouette. "Maybe this is my scene after all," Luca murmured under his breath, his lips curving into a hesitant smile. The thought was short-lived. As if on cue, the man turned to talk to a friend, and the pulsating light lit up his face. It wasn't just any man Luca was attracted to. It was his professor, Grayson. Luca froze. His stomach dropped, and his heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. There was no mistaking that jawline or that silhouette of his imposing frame. Grayson's usual intense eyes now softened with laughter. The man who had been haunting his fantasies was here, in this bar, in leather, looking every bit the confident, commanding stud that Luca had imagined in his dreams. "Let's go," Luca called out, tugging Alex's arm. "What? Are you serious?" Alex frowned, turning to follow Luca's gaze. When he spotted Grayson, a wicked grin spread across his face. "Wait. That's him, isn't it? Your Professor Daddy." "Shut up!" Luca whispered harshly, his cheeks burning. "Yes, it's him. That's why we have to leave." Alex rolled his eyes. "You're being ridiculous. This is a bar, not a classroom. He's not grading your fantasies. In fact, this could be your chance." "No way," Luca interrupted firmly. His pulse was racing, and the idea of facing Grayson in this setting dressed like that made his head spin. "We're leaving now." Alex groaned, but eventually relented. "Fine. But you're gonna regret this," he muttered as they made their way toward the exit. Luca didn't dare glance back at the bar, though he felt Grayson's presence pulling him towards him. The next evening, Luca sat in his usual seat in Grayson's class, but everything felt different. The once comfortable classroom now seemed impossibly small, as though the walls were closing in. Grayson was standing at the front of the room, his usual commanding presence, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and perfectly pressed slacks, but all Luca could see was the man from the bar. The snug leather vest, the straps framing his muscular arms, the easy confidence with which he had owned the space. "Focus," Luca muttered to himself, gripping his pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. But it was no use. Every time he looked at Grayson, the images from the previous night surged back into his mind. unbidden and relentless. How could he concentrate on business principles when every nerve in his body was still electrified from seeing Grayson in that way? How could he sit there and take notes like a good student when all he could think about was the bulge of Grayson's biceps, the rich rumble of his laugh, and the undeniable confidence he'd exuded in his leather-clad persona? Luca's pulse quickened every time Grayson's gaze swept across the classroom. Did Grayson recognize him? Did he know that Luca had been there the evening before? Had he seen him there? Did his professor now know he was gay and crushing on him hard? Luca dropped his pen, letting it roll off the desk as he raked his hands through his hair. He couldn't take this. Something had to be done. He couldn't go on like this, tortured, distracted, and unable to think about anything other than the man who now consumed every waking thought. But what could he do? Confront his professor and confess his feelings? Or let it go and try to deal with the burning passion within him? The answer wasn't clear, but Luca knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just a passing crush anymore. Grayson wasn't just his professor. He was something more to him, something Luca couldn't ignore any longer. Searching the leather bars on the weekends for Grayson became a ritual for Luca. Night after night, he searched the local bars looking for him. He scanned the rooms, searching for that familiar broad-shouldered silhouette, the man with the short, perfectly styled hair and the piercing blue eyes. Each time his heart raced with the promise that Grayson might walk into the club at any minute. Each time he'd leave soon after arriving, disappointed that he didn't find his professor. The ache in his chest grew heavier every time he saw Grayson, and though Alex teased him mercilessly for his obsession, telling him to do something or move on, Luca couldn't let it go. His teacher consumed his thoughts with every class he attended, being a tormenting experience. Grayson's deep and resonant voice was like a melody Luca couldn't get out of his head. The image of his shirts fitting just a little too tightly around his arms, the way he smiled when a student cracked a joke, the way his eyes seemed to linger on Luca just a fraction of a second too long, was maddening. Luca found himself at a crossroads as the semester drew to a close. Alex repeatedly urged him to talk to Grayson after class, but his courage failed him every time Luca lingered by the desk. He'd stammer out a question about assignments or deadlines, pretending that schoolwork was why he stayed behind. "You're hopeless," Alex declared after another failed attempt. "But if you don't tell him how you feel, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." "I know," Lucas sighed, running his hand through his hair. What if he doesn't feel the same about me? What if I make a fool of myself?" Alex rolled his eyes. "What if he's waiting for you to make a move? He's a professor. He probably wants to date you but can't ask out a student." Luca laughed off Alex's proposition, calling him ridiculous and delusional. On the final day of class, Luca promised himself he wouldn't leave without saying something. He couldn't let the semester end without making his move. He rehearsed his words over and over, his palms sweating as he watched the clock tick closer to the end of the lecture. But as the minutes slipped away, so did his nerve. When the class finally ended, Luca hesitated, his feet rooted to the floor as the other students filtered out. Grayson glanced his way, offering a small, polite smile before gathering his things in preparation to leave. Luca opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The opportunity passed, and with it, his heart sank. Disappointed in himself, Luca left the building and trudged toward his truck. The cool evening air did little to calm his racing thoughts. As he opened his truck door, he muttered under his breath, "You're such a coward. That was your last chance, and now you'll never see him again." But before he could climb inside, a strong, muscular arm pressed the truck door shut. Luca spun around, his back pressed against the cold metal as Grayson loomed over him, impossibly close. The scent of his cologne, woodsy and warm, washed over Luca, his body heat present as his muscular chest leaned against him. "I don't date students," Grayson said, his voice low and steady, his piercing blue eyes locked on Luca's. "I've been patient, waiting for the semester to end, waiting until you weren't my student anymore. Now that school's out, I'm not your professor. I feel that it's finally appropriate to approach you like this." Luca's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. Grayson's gaze burned into him, his presence overwhelming yet intoxicating. "Now that we're out of school and just two men apparently interested in each other," Grayson continued, his voice softening as a smile tugged at his lips, "may I be so bold as to ask you what you're doing tonight?" Luca's face sported a sly grin as he replied in a sultry whisper, "You." Luca then quickly closed the distance between his and Grayson's lips, giving him a deep, hungry kiss. Grayson's strong arms wrapped around Luca like steel bands, pulling him flush against his powerful body. The kiss was a culmination of every stolen glance, every heated fantasy, every unspoken word over the last few months. It was fire and electricity, passion and relief. Luca fumbled behind him, opening the door to his truck without breaking the kiss. He heaved at Grayson's thick black leather belt, pulling him closer and murmuring, "Well, are you getting in?" Grayson's eyes sparkled with mischief as his lips curved into a grin. "You betcha," he replied in a low rumble that sent a shiver down Luca's spine. Luca grinned as he glanced at his truck. He was suddenly grateful for two things. His truck was high off the ground, and the windows were darkly tinted. He knew they would have all the privacy they needed in the empty, dimly lit parking lot. Grayson leaned back on the leather seats of the truck, his strong arm draped possessively around Luca's shoulders, his other hand tracing slow, deliberate lines down Luca's chest. "You sure you don't mind getting a little off the syllabus tonight?" Grayson teased, his voice low and rough with desire. Luca smirked, straddling him, then leaning in to kiss him again, this time slower, savoring the way Grayson's hips grinded him against his own. "Oh, I'm all about extracurriculars," he murmured, his voice laced with heat. The cold evening air was no match for the passion built between them. The cab of the truck grew warmer with every passing moment, the windows fogging up as their kisses deepened and their hands roamed. Luca's pulse thundered in his ears as Grayson's fingers curled around his waist, pulling him closer, their bodies fitting together perfectly. Grayson's head tilted back as a breathless gasp escaped his lips. "It looks like you're going in for some extra credit this evening." Luca chuckled as he kneeled between Grayson's thick, tight thighs, unbuckling his polished leather belt. I know, but tonight I'm going for an A++. Well, someone was hot for teacher. It looks like Luca graduated magna cum laude this evening. We hope you and our friends at the Filmmakers Gallery enjoyed today's steamy story. We love hearing from our fans, whether it's your suggestions for new stories or sharing your own deliciously tawdry tales with us. So don't forget to comment, like, and share your favorite episodes with friends. Word of mouth helps promote the show and get us more listeners. And of course, make sure to visit us again soon for another sizzling, steamy story. Later, bro.